Olivia Carter had spent the whole evening pretending everything in her house was normal, even though the tension inside her chest had been growing for months, ever since her stepdaughter Emma began dating Daniel Hayes, a quiet 22-year-old with kind eyes and a steady voice that seemed to reach places Olivia didn't know were still alive in her. And on that Sunday night, after a small family dinner in their home in Portland, Oregon, she found herself watching everyone leave one by one, including her husband Mark, who rushed out for a late work emergency, and Emma, who left early for a study group, leaving the house strangely empty except for Daniel, who stood near the kitchen counter wiping his hands nervously as if he felt the same pressure in the air that Olivia did. She tried to busy herself with dishes, telling herself she was only being polite, only being a good host, but deep down she knew she was hiding from the silence she feared. Because the silence had been whispering things she did not want to hear about her failing marriage, her loneliness, and the way Daniel looked at her with worry every time Mark raised his voice or walked out of the room without listening to her. And when she thanked Daniel for helping, planning to quickly escape to her room, he stopped her gently and asked if she was okay, his voice low and sincere, and his question hit her harder than she expected because no one had asked her that in a long time, not even Mark, so she forced a smile and said she was fine. Yet Daniel didn't move, didn't step back, and instead he said he noticed how tired she looked and how she had barely eaten during dinner, and Olivia felt something break inside her at the simple truth in his words, and she finally admitted she was overwhelmed, not because she wanted sympathy, but because she was exhausted from carrying everything alone, and Daniel listened quietly, not interrupting, not judging, which made her open up more than she planned. She told him how Mark had been distant, how their marriage felt like a polite partnership instead of love, and how she'd been feeling invisible in her own home, and as she spoke, she kept waiting for Daniel to look away or seem uncomfortable, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer, still respectful, still calm, and told her she didn't deserve to feel invisible, that anyone could see how hard she was trying to hold her family together. And his words, simple but full of genuine care, made her throat tighten because she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, and she tried to steady her breathing, embarrassed by the tears forming in her eyes, but Daniel reached out instinctively and handed her a napkin, not touching her skin, not crossing any lines, simply offering comfort in the quietest, most respectful way, and that tiny act felt huge to her, and for the first time in years she felt a spark of warmth, one that scared her because she didn't want to feel anything for someone she should only see as her stepdaughter's boyfriend, yet she couldn't deny the calm he brought into the room just by being there. And while she tried to pull herself together, Daniel said something that unsettled her heart even more. He told her he stayed behind on purpose because he didn't want her to clean everything alone again, and because he sensed she needed someone to stay, someone to notice her, and he said it softly, carefully, making sure it didn't sound inappropriate, but the meaning still wrapped around her like a fragile truth she wasn't ready to face, and before she could reply, the power flickered from the storm outside, sending a low rumble through the house, and the lights dimmed for a moment, leaving them in a half-shadow that made the moment feel even more tense, and Olivia, feeling her breath catch, whispered that maybe she wasn't as strong as she pretended, and Daniel, looking straight into her eyes without hesitation, told her she didn't have to be strong all the time, not tonight, not with him here, and those words echoed inside her chest with a force she didn't expect, leaving her completely still, because for the first time in so long she felt the dangerous comfort of leaning on someone, even if only emotionally, and she didn't know how to step away from that, but she also wasn't sure she wanted to, and as the storm grew outside and the house settled into silence, Olivia realized Daniel wasn't looking at her like a boy seeing an older woman. He was looking at her like someone who cared about her pain, someone who didn't want to leave her alone with it, and in that moment, before either of them said another word, she knew something important had shifted in the air between them, something she wasn't ready to name, something she was afraid of but also drawn to, and just as she opened her mouth to speak, the front door suddenly rattled from the wind, making both of them jump, and Olivia's heart pounded fast because she knew the conversation, whatever it was becoming, was about to cross into dangerous emotional territory she might not be able to undo. The rattling of the front door from the storm had barely settled when Olivia and Daniel stood frozen, their eyes meeting in a moment thick with unspoken words, and Olivia, still holding the napkin, felt a strange mixture of fear and relief because she wasn't alone anymore, and Daniel, sensing her hesitation, took a careful step back, giving her the space she needed, yet his presence remained comforting. grounding her as the storm outside pounded harder, rattling the windows and sending shadows dancing across the walls, and she realized just how much she had missed having someone who truly noticed her, someone who could see past the polite mask she wore every day for Mark and Emma. And while her mind raced with guilt for feeling so drawn to Daniel, she also recognized that her emotions were valid, that they were natural responses to years of being ignored and undervalued, and she started speaking in a quiet, hurried voice, telling him about her day, about the way Mark had been curt and distant, about Emma's endless schoolwork and how lonely the house felt when everyone was busy with their own lives. And Daniel listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his gaze steady and empathetic, which made Olivia feel like she could finally release all the frustration she had bottled up for months. And as the wind howled, she laughed nervously, realizing she hadn't laughed like this in a long time, a genuine soft laugh that surprised her. And Daniel smiled too, the kind of warm smile that didn't feel like flirting but like someone rooting for you quietly. And then without warning, a loud crash of thunder shook the house, making both of them jump, and Olivia, still holding onto the counter, whispered that the storm reminded her of the chaos inside her own life, how unpredictable and loud everything felt, and Daniel responded by telling her that storms pass, that they always do, and while it sounded simple, it struck her deeply because it wasn't just about the weather. It was about her life, about the messiness she had been ignoring, and suddenly, the walls she had built around her heart started to feel thinner, almost fragile, and she realized she was starting to trust him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in years. Not Mark, not Emma, not even herself, and that thought both thrilled and terrified her, but she couldn't stop the small, hopeful smile that formed on her lips, a smile that Daniel noticed immediately, making him pause in a way that made the air between them feel charged, not with desire, but with connection. And Olivia, noticing the way he tilted his head as if considering her every word, felt an ache she couldn't explain, a longing for someone who would see her fully and not judge, and she realized Daniel already did, that he had been listening all this time, really listening, and the thought brought tears she couldn't hold back anymore, tears of relief, exhaustion, and something deeper, a need for care that had been starved for too long. And as she wiped them away quickly, embarrassed, Daniel gently said, "It's okay, Olivia. You don't have to hold it in. You don't have to be alone." And the softness in his voice made her heart beat faster, a reminder that comfort could come in the simplest forms, and for a moment, she let herself breathe, let herself feel, let herself exist outside the pressures of family expectations and social duties. And then the power flickered again, plunging them into semi-darkness, and Olivia felt a thrill of vulnerability mixed with excitement because it was just the two of them, facing the storm and the quiet of the house together. And without thinking, she admitted she hadn't realized how much she craved this kind of attention, this care. And Daniel, keeping his voice low and steady, said he understood that everyone deserved to feel seen and valued, and as he spoke, she noticed the sincerity in his words, the way he wasn't just being polite or charming. He was truly empathetic, and that realization made her heart ache with longing, a longing she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. And while she struggled to find the right words, Daniel leaned casually against the counter, giving her room, yet staying present, and his patience made her feel safe enough to confess small things she normally would have hidden, like her fears about Mark's distance, her worry that she was failing as a stepmother, and her guilt for sometimes wishing for a life that felt more her own. And Daniel responded with understanding, never minimizing her feelings, never rushing her. And the effect was overwhelming, because it was rare to find someone who made you feel that way without asking for anything in return. And Olivia found herself laughing and crying in the same breath, a strange release that left her exhausted but strangely exhilarated. And then, as if reading her thoughts, Daniel said, "You deserve to feel whole, Olivia, even if just for tonight." And those words, simple and careful, struck her so deeply that she froze, realizing how much she had been denying herself happiness, attention, and emotional intimacy. And she wanted to protest, to remind herself of boundaries, but her voice caught, and she only nodded, feeling the weight of his kindness, the quiet power of someone caring for her without expectation. And as the storm raged outside, she noticed how the house no longer felt empty, how the shadows seemed less threatening, and how, for the first time in months, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope, a spark that maybe she didn't have to carry everything alone, that maybe someone could stand beside her without judgment. And as the minutes stretched into hours, they continued to talk in whispers, sharing fears, small stories, and laughter, and Olivia realized she was forming a bond with someone who genuinely understood her struggles, someone who made her feel noticed and valued in a way that had nothing to do with romance or attraction yet made her heart flutter. And as the night grew deeper, the storm outside softened to a drizzle, but inside, the tension of unspoken emotions hung thickly in the air, leaving Olivia with a dangerous thought, that her life, which she had been living on autopilot, might be ready to change in ways she hadn't imagined. And Daniel, noticing the faraway look in her eyes, gave her a small, comforting smile that promised patience, understanding, and presence. And Olivia, breathing heavily, realized that although nothing had happened yet, something profound had shifted between them, a quiet emotional connection that neither of them could ignore. And just as she gathered her courage to speak again, the phone rang in the next room, startling them both, and the moment broke with a jolt, leaving Olivia wondering if the spell of the night, the storm, and Daniel's presence had been real or if it would vanish the second someone walked back through the door. And the uncertainty sent a thrill through her, a mix of fear and anticipation, because she knew that the next few moments could change everything she thought she knew about herself and the kind of love, care, and connection she truly craved. The sudden ringing of the phone had barely stopped when Olivia realized her heartbeat was still racing. The storm outside now softened to a gentle drizzle, but inside her chest, a different kind of storm was building, one she couldn't ignore. And Daniel, noticing the tension in her shoulders, gave her a calm, reassuring smile that seemed to say he understood every fear she hadn't voiced yet. And she took a deep breath, telling herself she needed to face the call, yet part of her wanted to stay in the quiet cocoon they had created, where no one judged her and she could simply be. And as she walked toward the living room, phone in hand, she hesitated for a split second, glancing back at Daniel, who nodded ever so slightly, silently offering permission to lean on him emotionally. And that tiny gesture made her chest tighten because it was rare to find someone who truly offered support without expecting anything in return. And when she answered the call, it was Emma on the other line, her voice cheerful and unaware of the emotional turbulence at home, asking if Olivia could help with some last-minute homework problems. And Olivia felt a mix of love and exhaustion because she cared for Emma deeply, but at that moment, she longed for just a few more minutes of calm, just a few more minutes of conversation with Daniel, and she promised Emma she would help after a short break, hanging up with a soft sigh. And Daniel immediately asked if she was okay, if she felt too tired, and his attention made her realize just how starved she had been for someone who truly listened, someone who didn't dismiss her feelings. And she confessed quietly that she felt worn out, that she hadn't realized how much weight she carried every day. And Daniel listened without interrupting, his eyes steady, his presence grounding her like an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. And she felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name yet. And she caught herself staring at him for a moment too long, wondering how one person could make her feel both calm and nervous at the same time. And Daniel, sensing the vulnerability in her glance, didn't look away or make her uncomfortable. Instead, he offered a small, comforting smile, one that felt like permission to feel her emotions fully. And in that silent understanding, Olivia realized she was beginning to trust him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in years, that he had become a safe place in the stormy chaos of her life. And she found herself talking faster now, sharing memories she hadn't thought about in months, small stories from her childhood, little secrets about her fears and dreams. And Daniel encouraged her gently, asking questions that made her reflect on what she truly wanted. And she realized she could be completely honest without fear of judgment, which was a revelation she hadn't expected to experience with someone who wasn't family. And as the minutes turned into hours, the house settled into a soft quiet, punctuated only by the soft hum of the storm outside and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. And Olivia felt herself relax more with every passing second, laughing softly at small jokes, pausing to wipe away tears that came unbidden, feeling the strange joy of being understood and seen. And Daniel, patient and respectful, didn't push her or cross any boundaries, simply offering comfort and presence, and that made her feel both safe and alive at the same time, a combination that left her both exhilarated and nervous. And she wondered if it was possible to feel such a connection without it being romantic. Yet her heart fluttered despite her attempts to rationalize it, and she caught herself thinking about how few people in her life had ever truly cared in this way, how rare it was to find someone who could make you feel whole just by listening, just by being present. And she realized she had been craving that connection far longer than she had admitted, even to herself. And Daniel, noticing the faraway look in her eyes, asked softly if she wanted to sit down and take a breath, and Olivia nodded, feeling an unspoken trust between them. And as she sat on the couch, Daniel stayed nearby, not crowding her, not forcing conversation, just allowing the silence to be comfortable, which made her heart beat faster because it was rare to experience quiet companionship without tension. And she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of weeks, months, maybe years of loneliness and stress start to lift, replaced by a gentle sense of hope and possibility, and she found herself smiling without realizing it, a small hesitant smile that felt like the first ray of sunlight after a long winter, and Daniel noticed, complimenting her lightly on how her smile brightened the room, and Olivia laughed softly, feeling warmth spread through her chest, and she realized that even though nothing romantic or inappropriate had happened, the emotional intimacy they shared was profound, rare and deeply affecting, and as the night deepened, they continued talking in low voices, sharing thoughts, small dreams, regrets, and quiet fears, and Olivia noticed how easy it felt to be herself, to show vulnerability without fear, and Daniel responded in kind, opening up slightly about his own challenges, making her realize that genuine connection required honesty from both sides, and that realization made her heart ache in a bittersweet way, understanding that trust and care were fragile yet incredibly powerful. And as the storm finally cleared and the first light of dawn touched the edges of the windows, Olivia felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a strange nervous anticipation because she knew their bond had shifted something in her, something she couldn't undo, something that had changed the way she viewed support, kindness, and the possibility of emotional connection. And Daniel, noticing the change in her demeanor, simply said, "Whatever comes next, you're not alone." And those words, simple yet profound, left her breathless, heart racing, and mind spinning with questions about what the future held. And before either of them could speak again, Emma returned, early footsteps in the hallway breaking the cocoon of privacy, and Olivia's pulse quickened, realizing that the intimate, emotional night they had shared was about to be interrupted, leaving her to wonder how much of the connection they had built would survive the return to reality. And she glanced at Daniel, who gave her a small, reassuring nod, a silent promise that the moment wasn't lost, that what they shared was real, and that reassurance gave her courage, even as the door opened and Emma's cheerful voice filled the room, marking the end of the night's private world. And Olivia realized that even with the return to normal life, something deep inside her had shifted forever, leaving her heart full of hope, longing, and the quiet certainty that she had finally found someone who truly saw her, someone whose presence could quietly change everything. And she knew that the coming days would test her emotions, challenge her boundaries, and force her to navigate feelings she hadn't felt in years. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone, and the thought both frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. The morning light crept through the curtains, painting soft lines across the living room where Olivia sat with a cup of coffee, still feeling the echo of last night's conversations with Daniel. And even though Emma had gone to school and Mark was out for work, the house felt different now, warmer somehow, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the quiet intensity of their shared moments. And Olivia realized she had spent years running on autopilot, ignoring her own needs, but now, with Daniel's calm presence lingering in her mind, she felt a spark of awareness that she hadn't known she was missing. And as she sipped her coffee, she thought about how easily he had made her feel seen, truly seen, without pushing, without judgment, just by listening and caring. And it frightened her a little, because she hadn't felt that kind of connection in years, and yet, the fear was tinged with hope, a dangerous but exciting feeling she couldn't resist, and she found herself remembering small details about him from last night. The gentle way he had handed her the napkin, the soft tone of his voice, the way he had stayed calm when she had broken down emotionally, and each memory made her chest tighten with a mix of longing and gratitude. And as she considered how her life had been so full of noise and responsibilities, she realized that having someone who simply understood her made her want to rethink how she had been living. And Daniel, she remembered, hadn't offered solutions or lectures. He had simply been present, letting her emotions flow freely, and that kind of empathy was rare, almost sacred. And as she reflected on that, her phone buzzed, a text from Daniel, polite, friendly, asking if she was okay this morning, and the simple gesture made her heart skip a beat, a reminder that the connection they had formed wasn't tied to one moment. It was continuing quietly, and it felt comforting, grounding, and exciting all at once. And Olivia felt a sudden urge to respond immediately, to write back, but paused, thinking about boundaries, respect, and how to navigate this growing bond carefully. and she realized that the challenge itself was thrilling, a test of her ability to balance her feelings with her responsibilities. And as she typed a careful but warm reply, Daniel's answer came quickly, thoughtful and lighthearted, and the conversation flowed naturally, giving her a sense of normalcy intertwined with emotional depth she hadn't expected. And Olivia found herself smiling at the small jokes he included, laughing softly out loud, a sound that had been missing from her mornings for too long. And she noticed how this small exchange had the power to lift her mood instantly, making her realize the magnitude of emotional support and genuine attention. And as she looked out the window, she saw the sun breaking fully through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the garden, and she felt a symbolic shift inside her as well, a kind of clarity that she hadn't felt before, understanding that life could be harsh and chaotic but also tender and filled with unexpected care. And she thought about the people in her life, Mark, Emma, friends, colleagues, and realized that while they loved her in their ways, few had ever offered the simple gift of being fully present, listening, caring without expectation. And that realization made her heart ache in a bittersweet way, because she had taken so long to acknowledge her own needs, and now she didn't want to turn back. And as she finished her coffee, she decided to take a small walk outside to gather her thoughts, letting the cool breeze brush her face, feeling the physical release of tension from her body. And she noticed how much more alive the world seemed after last night, how vibrant and full of possibility it felt, and Daniel's presence lingered in her mind, not as a temptation but as a gentle reminder that human connection could be transformative, that someone's care could make the difference between feeling invisible and feeling valued. And as she strolled around the neighborhood, greeting neighbors with a smile, she realized she carried a new lightness in her steps, a quiet confidence that came from being emotionally nurtured. And she thought about the days to come, how she would face challenges at home, work, and in her personal life, but with a new understanding that she didn't have to face them alone emotionally, that she could seek support and allow herself to be vulnerable without shame. And the thought made her heart swell with gratitude, and she couldn't stop thinking about the conversations she and Daniel had shared. The laughter, the silences, the moments of honesty, and she knew that even if life continued to be unpredictable, she had found a companion in empathy, someone whose presence would remind her of her own worth and the importance of caring relationships. And as she returned home, sunlight streaming across the floors, she felt an internal shift, a readiness to embrace her life more fully, to express her emotions honestly, and to allow herself the simple joy of being seen and appreciated. And when Daniel texted again to ask if she wanted to meet for a brief walk that evening, she felt a thrill of anticipation, a gentle excitement that was pure and safe, reminding her that connections could bring happiness without chaos. And she replied with warmth, feeling a subtle flutter in her chest, the kind that signaled hope and curiosity about what might grow between two people who respected boundaries yet shared emotional intimacy. And as she set her phone down and looked around her home, she realized that last night had marked a turning point, not in a dramatic or reckless way, but quietly, profoundly, the kind of moment that changed how she viewed relationships, empathy, and the possibility of emotional fulfillment. And she smiled softly to herself, knowing that whatever challenges came, she now carried a new awareness of her own needs and the courage to honor them. And as the day unfolded with small tasks, minor errands, and the laughter of Emma returning from school, Olivia moved through each moment with a calm energy she hadn't felt in years, a sense that she was finally stepping into a life where connection, understanding, and care were not luxuries but essential. And with Daniel's friendship and presence gently threading through her thoughts, she felt the quiet strength of hope, the thrill of new beginnings, and the comforting knowledge that even in the simplest gestures, emotional fulfillment could be found, leaving her heart full, her mind clear, and her spirit quietly exhilarated, ready to embrace life in a way she had almost forgotten was possible.